Hi everyone, welcome to Intel 471's UK threat landscape brief. So just for everyone's awareness, this brief is TLP white. We do have more content available at TLP amber and amber strict. So if anyone does want any more further detail, please use my email, which will be on the last slide, and we'll get you that information as soon as we possibly can. But thanks for joining us, everyone. So today's brief will usually take around 20 to 25 minutes, maybe 30, depending on how much detail I go into on some of the slides. And then there'll be some time for questions at the end as well. If you do have any questions, if you want to pop them into the questions chat box, I'll get around to them at the end. So today we'll just go through a brief introduction about me, who I am, my role at Intel 471. Intel 471 and our bread and butter, which is HUMINT, human intelligence. We'll talk about why human intelligence is relevant to CTI, rather than it being physical HUMINT, more of a cyber HUMINT spin on that. We'll talk about the British underground. So we don't call the dark web or the deep and dark web, we call it the cyber underground, because it's definitely not deep and it's definitely not dark either. So we'll refer to it as the underground throughout this presentation. We'll talk through some top threats to be aware of, which will be access brokers, ransomware, information stealers, the impact to Russia, Ukraine, and the ongoing conflict there. One particular group called KillNet, and then our future outlook on where we see potential threats in the near future. And then, as I said, questions at the end too. So a bit of background about myself. So I'm one of the intelligence directors here at Intel 471. Prior to joining Intel 471, I worked at a company called CRISP, where I was the global intelligence team lead there. And then prior to that, I was in the intelligence corps in the UK military, working with a variety of units worldwide and in the UK. So with that background, I have a large commercial background. I've worked with a variety of companies such as Google, YouTube, or the whole Alphabet group in general, TikTok, Facebook, and then some big brands at the bottom like Philip Morris International, Chanel, Gucci. And across my tenure working between those different companies and my military background, I've done a variety of CTI, counter CSAM, counter radicalization, and then also counter terrorism as well through that tenure. So why HUMINT? So human intelligence is usually thought of as more of a physical type of intelligence discipline. And HUMINT isn't easy at all. But what HUMINT does provide, and why it's our bread and butter, is that it provides detailed early insights and context that's not available anywhere else. Anybody can scrape a forum or anybody can scrape content together. But what people really need is the insight and context. Without that, anything you could take anything away from some of these forum posts. Cyber criminals or criminals in general do lie. So it's important that we get that valued context as and when it's needed. So what kind of context can we gather? Well, one of the main things is insight into adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures from these particular criminals, or in general, HUMINT gives you that. So in the cyberspace, that may be specific malware or specific tools or infrastructure that these cyber criminals tend to use. So by that, there may be groups of individuals talking together or in closed forums where they may discuss a new particular type of malware that they've developed or that they are developing. They may talk about particular tools they're looking at, or how they're gaining access to different types of infrastructure, or how they want to impact different types of infrastructure. It also gives you insight into tactics and capabilities that aren't going to be published anywhere else. At the end of the day, these criminals are criminals, and they tend to have, well, the more advanced ones anyway, tend to have increased OPSEC, or operational security. They're not going to be posting publicly on forums where anybody can access what their new tactics are, what new capabilities that they've developed or their teams have developed. And that's key, and HUMINT brings that. It also provides an insight into their targets and motivations as well. So they aren't going to publish that they're going to attack a particular sector, or they believe a particular sector is vulnerable, such as, let's just say, the consumer and industrial product sector. As that becomes more digitized, threat actors aren't going to announce that they're going to target that particular sector above others. That will only start to be seen without HUMINT over time as you start to correlate events moving forward. So with that, it's important to understand that HUMINT also provides the context and relationships between other actors. So actor X may speak to actor Y. How do they communicate? What are they talking about? Is there a link there? And we'll talk about this further in the presentation as well. One example of this may be access brokers or initial access brokers who provide that initial access to particular ransomware groups. Those ransomware groups then can then accelerate their operations and then move forward with impacting companies with ransomware rather than spending time trying to gain that initial access. That relationship will build over time and they will then eventually become partners. We'll also see things like threat actors using particular bulletproof hosting providers or using particular threat actors that offer to make malware FUD fully undetectable. So all this kind of context is information that HUMINT does provide. And that relationship is key when you start to try and map out this threat landscape in general. So knowing your adversary enables you to build your defenses around that. Unless you know what you're coming up against, you can't build your defenses around it. It's like going back to my military days. We wouldn't start building sandbags and putting sandbags down to protect us against things unless we knew it was going to come from a particular direction or what those things were. And the same applies to the CTI space. You need to know what you're coming up against. And if you don't, then you can't properly defend yourself or defend your business. So, like I've mentioned, why is HUMINT relevant to CTI? I've covered some of this already, but just to go through in a bit more detail, why Intel 471 is different. So our HUMINT capability, we offer a boots on the ground model. So what we mean by that is we have researchers and individuals that are located in countries where threat actors operate. Now, that not only enables them to speak the native language of these threat actors on these particular forums, groups, or whatever that may be, but it also enables these individuals to speak the criminal language of these criminals, such as when you're talking to these criminals, if you're going to do this in, let's just say, a physical space again, if you're going to infiltrate a drug gang or a terrorist network, you would have to act or talk in a certain way. If you didn't, you would be found out. This is much harder to do behind a keyboard because you can't interact with someone, you can't get physical cues. So being able to do that and speak this criminal language is very unique to Intel 471 and what gives us this amazing insight across the board. It enables you to fully understand the adversary you're faced with rather than trying to plug gaps from lots of different reports, lots of different vendors, for example, and trying to piece everything together in your own business. Trying to pull that together and then brief that to wider people within the company to build those defenses or change your tack to be able to better defend in general against potential or looming threats. Knowing what you're coming up against is really key. So although we are HUMINT driven, we do rely a lot on technology and automation as well. So it's not just HUMINT, we are backed by technology and automation too. A big one for me across the board with HUMINT and why it's relevant to CTI is, as I've already harped on about previously, is verifying claims. So a threat actor may post on a forum and say, I have access to this particular company. It may be VPN access, and these are the credentials. I want $5,000 for them. What's key is our unique insight of being able to understand if that is real or not, engaging that threat actor and being able to communicate via HUMINT and say, let's see if this is real. We don't want to start starting fires. We want to start putting out fires. And that is really key, is understanding if that claim is legitimate or not. Like I've already said, criminals do lie and they do want to make a quick buck. Every criminal, well, most criminals, I should say, not every criminal, most criminal on the cyber underground is in this for financial gain. They want to make money. If they can make money in a quick way by selling you something, well, selling people something that isn't legitimate, then of course they will. Automation doesn't provide that context. Human intelligence definitely does. Also, a variety of businesses, especially in 2022, are aware of the threat posed by cybercrime, especially with like some big incidents like the Colonial Pipeline incident, and even years before that, like the WannaCry incident from many years ago. People are aware of these particular incidents, but they're not aware of how to defend against it. And that's where HUMINT provides that added context that's not normally available. So those lessons that we identify and lessons learned from HUMINT can support business operations and business plans, ultimately with our end goal of enabling you to fight cybercrime and win. So the British Underground. I'm calling it the British Underground because there are different tranches within the cyber underground. There's like the Italian underground, the French underground. I'm calling it that to give it unique context because it is different. The underground is made up of many different facets. It's not just one thing where everybody goes. And I'll talk through this now. So the British Underground, What is key here is that a lot of threat actors do tend to speak English. Now, where do they operate? They operate on a variety of forums. So we see them operating on Russian speaking forums, or what used to be predominantly Russian speaking forums, and they will communicate in English. Years ago, there used to be Italian speaking forums only, or Portuguese speaking forums only, French speaking forums, etc., where they communicate with one another. However, criminals have learned that by speaking in their native language, that their OPSEC isn't exactly great, which brings me on to the why. Why do they communicate in English? Well, there's two reasons for this. One is that it provides them added operational security because they're coming across as being English or from an English speaking country, which allows them to then communicate with a larger client base. There's a lot of people on the underground that speak English or understand English. So by operating and communicating in English, that then opens up their client base, as it were, for more and more people to buy their product or buy what they're selling. So it is also an operational security measure, but it is also a business improvement measure from these individuals. So we will see Russian speaking forums or Chinese speaking forums, and individuals will be communicating on there in English. Now, there are also English speaking forums too, where a lot of threat actors will only communicate in English, with a few other languages thrown in the middle, but predominantly English too. Telegram is becoming extremely popular, and I'll come on to KillNet further down into the presentation, but Telegram is becoming extremely popular with underground threat actors. It's easy to communicate. People have it on their phones. There's no need to, you can't get on Tor on your phone, stuff like that. It allows them to communicate with one another and build up that personal relationship. And social media is also becoming extremely popular. One social media platform in general, Facebook, they can set up closed groups for that. So being able to set up a closed Facebook group where you have to answer set questions or a bit of a test to get in there really makes it difficult for people to gain access, or unauthorized people to gain access to that group that they don't know or that haven't passed their criteria, as it were. So with that, social media is also becoming extremely popular. Twitter is also popular for these threat actors to publish things on there, or throw things out there to move people off track where they should be looking. And they do this as well as an operational security measure. So Britain has been extremely impacted by access brokers, and we see that across the British underground. Access brokers are actively compromising a variety of British businesses every single day, on quite a large scale in some cases. There's also been a steady volume of ransomware attacks or ransomware as a service operations in 2022. There's no surprise there, but that is something that we are seeing a steady increase of across the country. In general, the UK is ranked third out of all EU countries. I will just say that although it's third out of all EU countries, when it's put on one of the slides further down, that is dwarfed by America because there's a lot more attacks that happen in America. So compared to Britain, America is much more significant. So on the graph further down, that does reflect that. So the breakdown of the underground. So the underground is like any commercial business or commercial businesses would operate. So there are products for sale, there are goods for sale, and there are services for sale. And we've broken this down at Intel 471. Threat actors operate in all of these three areas. So, for example, they may sell particular products such as malware, web injects, phishing kits, which can then be purchased or made bespoke in some circumstances, which cross into the service bit. But generally speaking, they tend to make these web injects, malware, or phishing kits, which can then be purchased as products by potential buyers. The good side of things, now this is where the access brokers come in. They sell a particular good, which is network access. They can also sell account credentials, which again links into network access. There's credit card data, and there's also database dumps and a lot more other things, such as PII, etc., that are also sold as commodity goods. And then there's services. These are particular services that threat actors offer. So one may be ransomware as a service, where particular threat actors decide to make new ransomware, which may have additional features, or develop ransomware. Another point we'll come on to later down is Lockbit 3.0, and how they develop that ransomware. So one would be developing ransomware. Another one may be malware as a service. So particular actors may offer malware as a service, or say, I have this particular information stealer, for example. If you tell me what you want it to do, I will try and add that to this or configure it within this information stealer, and then I will make it bespoke or specific to you as a customer. Whilst also offering other things like making malware fully undetectable from antivirus or other systems. These are all common offers that we see across the underground. And of course, bulletproof hosting as well, which is a common service that we see offered regularly. So in terms of recent threats towards the UK, I won't go on into detail about too many of these because we are at TLP White. But again, if you do want any more info, please do drop me a line. So one top example was in September. We've seen an actor offer to sell network access credentials to a variety of businesses worldwide, not just Britain, but from many, many other countries too. One of those impacted entities was a UK educational institute. Now, that is commonplace. We tend to see that through September onwards, and again when universities start to return to school. So with that, we start to see these threat actors target these universities. But the main question is why? Well, universities do offer a variety of research and conduct a variety of research. If they're able to compromise that research, they could arguably hold the university to ransom as they are seen as financially lucrative institutions because of the funding that universities get. So they believe if they get hands on this research or this confidential information, they could then try and ransom that back to the business, or they could look to sell that in order to make a quick profit for themselves too. Other things well that we see is threat actors offering teams or discussing teams of hackers or individuals that are willing to target businesses of all sizes across Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US is that example there. We see this quite regularly where they're offering or they're discussing their team and how they can impact a variety of businesses across these countries. And then again, also actors offering to sell account config files targeting different organizations, with the UK, US being commonly targeted areas. So top threats to be aware of. Access brokers, in my opinion, is one of the biggest ones. Reason being is that access brokerage is now being seen as a very lucrative trade or job set, as it were, within the cyber underground. So we're starting to see a lot more actors shift into the access broker world, as well as traditional access brokers increasing their numbers of offerings. And that's something that all businesses should be aware of because there is a link between these access brokers. And we'll come on to this shortly as well. The next one I would say is malware. So malware in general is a specific threat to be aware of. Ransomware, obviously a type of malware, is arguably the biggest threat to businesses because of the financial impact that can cause. Information stealers is also a significant threat because of how commonly available are, how cheap they are, how easily they can be spread, the fact that they can stay on a system and they need to be removed. You can't just change your password. Make information stealers a very big threat to be aware of in 2022 and moving into 2023. And some other threats to be aware of. So KillNet and hacktivism in general. So KillNet are a group that we'll discuss further down too. And other groups since the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We have seen groups like KillNet pop up. They are a significant threat, more of a nuisance at the moment. That doesn't mean they won't branch out into other things, but I'd argue KillNet and groups like them are also a significant threat. And then social engineering. So the use of marketplaces and threat actors purchasing cookies, for example, off marketplaces, conducting a session hijacking attack, and then starting to conduct social engineering whilst they've conducted the session hijacking attack to allow them to gain further access into a variety of networks is significant. Also, social engineering just in general is a significant threat that we're starting to see more and more of, and we have seen a lot of throughout 2022. So access brokers, well, first of all, what are they? Well, it's exactly what it says on the tin. Access brokers are individuals that sell access to businesses for a variety of reasons, but the main reason is for financial gain. Why are they important? Well, you need to be aware of these as businesses within the UK if they're selling access to either your own business or your third parties that you work with. Because if they're able to compromise you or your third parties, there could be further, more sophisticated cyber attacks either directed at you or your business partners further down the line. How do they obtain access? There's a variety of different access merchants and they operate in a variety of different ways. Some of the most common ways that we see them obtain access is through information stealers, so malware logs and then compromised credentials. But then one other way is we see a lot of lower level access brokers when they first start out doing this as a trade, as it were. They tend to gather all of old lists and old credentials or old malware logs, and they combine them into one big list. By making that into one big list, they then sell that or try and sell that for more money. But all they've done is just combined a load of old data and then tried to sell it. Some of it may still be correct or accurate, but that is just something to bear in mind too. They can be detected and then therefore they can be prevented. The main way of doing that is monitoring forums or using companies like Intel 471 to be able to provide that human intelligence and go through this data or be able to dig into it and find out what companies these access brokers are selling access to. So then you can then either speak to your third party or you can investigate it further and then find out if this is a particular threat, if it has actually impacted your organization, and then therefore you can prevent it. In terms of top examples, I won't go into too many of them by name, but one which I will talk about at TLP White is an actor called Babam. So Babam was a predominantly Russian-speaking actor. Now, this actor used to sell a variety of accesses, VPN, RDP accesses. He or she was selling them for quite some time across a variety of underground forums. They've since gone dark since they were removed from a few forums. So that's why I'm talking about them. But there are many, many others. I'd say there's probably a top 10 list of access brokers that are continually operating at like the top level of access brokerage, and they're actively selling access to a variety of companies from a variety of sectors. Most of these access brokers don't tend to care what companies they have. They don't target particular industries or sectors. What they want to do is just make money. However, that being said, we are starting to see more links now between ransomware groups and access brokers where they have a sort of relationship. And it's arguable that they have a retainer scheme with these ransomware groups where they'll say, we want access to company X. Should you gain access to that company, let us know straight away and we'll be interested in buying it. We are seeing that. It's very hard to detect that though, but that is something that I would say we are starting to see too. General prices for access, again, depends on the broker. The more advanced the access broker, the more money they want. A bit like football players, the better they are, the more money that they're going to want from their club. Now, access brokers are very, very similar in that sense. So if they're more advanced access broker or they believe the access that they have is legitimate or they've tested it, which is one thing we also see them do, checking these credentials. But if this is something that they think is legit or they think it's a very, very lucrative business to have access to, then they'll want more money. Other access brokers tend to sell them in chunks. So they may say accesses of 50, 70, 100 maybe, but they want between $5,000 and $10,000 for this list of accesses. People on the underground do pay those prices. The more lower level access brokers who combine those lists, like I spoke about previously, or they are just trying to gain a quick buck. They haven't tested anything out. They may be old malware logs. Those prices for individual accesses can range between $75 to maybe $200, depending on the organization, depending on the number of accesses, level of access, etc. But generally, prices can range from between $75 all the way up to $10,000, if not $15,000. Malware. So, as we've already mentioned, ransomware is probably the main one to be aware of. Now, ransomware. So, as I already mentioned, this slide covers the US too. So, obviously, the UK plotting on there doesn't look like it's significant, but in comparison, it is still quite large. So, globally, we are starting to see a general uptick in ransomware. However, the months that we do tend to see an increase are in the middle of the year and towards the end of the year. So arguably October, November, maybe even December around the holiday period, we will start to see more ransomware. But again, March, April, and May, middle of the years when the beginning to the middle of the years when we start to see an uptick in ransomware too. So some victims, I won't go into too much detail on these, but some victims that we have seen are on the right-hand side. And then the ransomware variant that we've seen, it's not just the same variant over and over again. We are starting to see groups like Vice Society, Hive, Clop, and others start to compromise UK businesses. I'd argue Lockbit 3.0 is one to take away, as well as Hive and Blackbuster as key takeaways. Those three ransomware variants are some variants that we are tend to see a lot of globally, and they are starting to target the UK. So this slide just depicts UK ransomware breakdown. So as you can see, there are a variety of sectors that have been impacted. And over the course of the year, Lockbit 2.0 was the most active variant targeting UK businesses. If anyone does want this breakdown, again, I can pass this on after the brief too. But just as a key takeaway, Lockbit 2.0 followed by Conti and by Society are the three top variants that we've seen in 2022. This slide just discusses the European ransomware breakdown and where the UK sits in that. So as you can see, the UK sits third, only being trumped by Italy and Germany in terms of most impacted countries. With no surprise, again, Lockbit being one of the most active ransomware variants targeting all countries, across all countries in Europe. Most impacted sectors in Europe being consumer and industrial product sector and the manufacturing sector as well. Arguably, that's because those sectors have become more digitized, therefore increasing their attack surface, which then gives ransomware groups a larger target to aim for. So a breakdown of Lockbit 2.0. The reason that I'm putting this on the screen is to just show you how impactful Lockbit 2.0 was. Now, Lockbit have developed a new variant, Lockbit 3.0. So arguably, this slide over the next 12 months or the next 6 months will be Lockbit 3.0, and we're going to see a similar, if not more, increased period of activity from this particular ransomware group. Now, the group wasn't really targeting any particular sector above others, but as you can see, consumer and industrial products really took a hit from Lockbit, and they tended to impact the US more than any other country. Again, the US has a lot of businesses there. There's a lot threat actors see there being a lot of money there as well, so they tend to target that sector a lot more. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the breakdown again being April is a very active month, and March as well. So the ransomware attack pathway, how ransomware groups operate. I really want to hammer this home that everybody talks about ransomware, but ransomware is the last turn of the screw in any operation. In order to be able to defend against ransomware or be aware of ransomware, how to stop a ransomware attack, you need to look at the precursors to ransomware, like access brokers, like particular malware being used, software that's being discussed and being used by threat actors. Are they using greyware, for example, that you can search for on your systems? Like, are they using Mimikatz? Are they using particular Cobalt Strike beacons? Can you look for them? All those kind of things are things that you need to be aware of well before ransomware has been deployed. If ransomware has been deployed, it's the last turn of the screw. So this attack pathway just discusses that. They gain entry, they understand the environment, they don't tend to just do it straight away. What they tend to do is they'll move around this environment, they'll look for data of importance, they'll then see where, if they can make any more accounts, do they have access to an admin account, start to gain a foothold within that network, and then they'll start to move with that. They'll move laterally within that network, as I've just mentioned, and then they'll look for data of importance to exfiltrate. Now, when they deploy ransomware, the more advanced groups tend to destroy backups and deploy ransomware simultaneously so that the organization can't just restore that. So that's why I'm saying ransomware deployment is the very last turn of the screw. It's already too late at that stage. So the links, as I mentioned, between ransomware and access merchants, I won't go on this slide too much, but generally speaking, we tend to see access brokers monetize access on forums, ransomware affiliates pay for that access, and then they deploy ransomware. The average time we're seeing between access being offered and then ransomware deployed is around 71 days, with the average ransom demand in Q1 of this year being 3.79 million. So a significant amount for any organization. So next, information stealers. So what are they? Well, an information stealer in general is very similar to a Trojan, and it's designed to gather information from a system. Now, the most common form of information that information stealers try and gather is login information like usernames and passwords, when then they'll send that over a network or via an email to other systems that are operated by threat actors. Why are they important? Well, they're important because they're programmed to steal credentials and other information that's stored on the machine. Now, that makes them very, very significant for any business. So you need to be aware of information stealers in general and how they're spread, which brings me on to the next point. They usually spread through malspam or maybe macro-enabled documents, stuff like that. So it's common infection vectors, how they're spread. But that's something to be aware of in general, especially when communicating with wider individuals within your business. As I mentioned, what they do with the data, they send it back. Threat actors can then take this data and they can use data for their own personal gain. So this data may be high value data, which they can then use for their own advantage, or they can also scan systems and they can identify them where particular files may be, or where these threat actors want to deploy ransomware. Some top examples are Kpot, Raccoon Stealer, Redline, and Vidar. They're some of the top ones that we're starting to see. Raccoon Stealer is constantly being developed, and there's plenty of other stealers as well. People tend to develop them. Some people offer them as a service. You pay a nominal fee over the course of a year, and they'll rent these types of stealers out to you. Or sometimes they just give you their stealer. The general prices for these, they can range. It depends on the stealer. Sometimes $50, sometimes $200. It entirely depends on the stealer and what that stealer does. So if the stealer, for example, is just there to steal browser cookies, it may be cheaper than a stealer that's been developed to steal cryptocurrency wallets, or to look at desktop applications or take screenshots on a system. So the Russia-Ukraine impact has impacted the cyber underground in some ways. With the cyber underground being, a main breeding ground for financially motivated cybercrime, it hasn't impacted that much, but it has started to see a significant impact in terms of fracturing. So one of these fracturings is a particular group called KillNet. Now, these are a pro-Russian hacktivist group, and what they tend to do is target a variety of businesses through DDoS activity. They target organizations that are seen as hostile to Russia or that oppose the war in Ukraine. They tend to publish all of their communications via Telegram, and they communicate it in advance. They do operate their own DDoS service and botnet, and they are made up in this particular way. So they have the main KillNet group, a DDoS team called Legion. They have different Legion squads that target a variety of different countries, and then affiliated groups that work with them, as you can see on the right-hand side. Now, KillNet aren't really a significant threat in terms of their damage. It is only DDoS. However, they have been talking about delving into ransomware. So although they're more of a nuisance at the moment, and yet they will cause disruption in terms of a significant threat, it's not as significant as other threats out there across the cyber underground. So with that being said, they are more of a nuisance, but it doesn't mean that they won't become more and more advanced in the future. In terms of targets by country, as you can see, they have targeted Ukraine quite a lot, Italy, Latvia, Estonia, again, ex-Soviet countries, and also a variety of other countries that are opposed to the war in Ukraine. Top sectors, 3 key takeaways: telecoms, national government, and then aviation and transportation. Again, more of a disruption piece. You target those sectors, the more that they can disrupt them, the more impact that they believe that they can have. So, already mentioned, targets published in advance. They tend to work to prevent any support to Ukraine. That is their main goal, basically. And then with that, their actual impact is limited, as I've already mentioned. They can be prevented using systems like Cloudflare, for example, DDoS mitigation services. You can prevent against them. They publish their targets in advance, so there is that early warning system in place by monitoring these Telegram channels. However, they won't be able to launch sustained DDoS for weeks on end. It would be more of a short, high burst impact more than anything else. They've recently just had a hiatus period where they went quiet, and they've come back saying that they're recently targeting a variety of government organizations across Japan. On the right-hand side just discusses their Telegram group. Their Telegram group there. And then again, other groups that have tried to combat KillNet, such as Anonymous, which we saw in Italy. Other impacts that we're seeing since the war in Ukraine is a group called Cyber Army Russia, which also conduct DDoS attacks against government websites, and they have targeted the energy sector as well. From Russia with Love Team, they tend to publish data, classified data as they call it, from Ukraine and the US. And then MVP hackers as well. They tend to want to expose Ukrainian government official data. And they're also joining efforts with KillNet to bring down the RU Tor forum. And No Name 057 is the most active group that we've seen. They also conduct DDoS attacks similar to KillNet. As you can see, these are very impactful. They're more of a nuisance rather than a significant threat. So just things to be aware of. And then again, no names target a variety of countries like KillNet, Finland, Latvia, Norway, and Poland, to name but a few. So finally, future outlook. So what is likely to happen over the next 6 to 12 months? Well, as the energy crisis looms, it's highly likely that we're going to see threat actors pounce on this, just like we have done in the past with COVID. Now, they're likely to use phishing as a particular type of law to target people. This will tend to be a financially lucrative way for these people to make money. So the energy crisis will probably be something that these threat actors latch onto. Now, one point to be aware of as well is that threat actors do tend to follow global events such as the energy crisis, just like they did in the UK recently when there was we had a bit of a water crisis. The water industry was heavily targeted. So it does show that what's going on in the world will impact what happens in the cyber underground. These criminals do tend to pounce on that and they use it to their advantage for their own personal gains. The public sector is actively being targeted since the war in Ukraine. And with that, we are tend to see a lot more hacktivism, which takes place globally, but mainly for those countries that are pro-Ukraine. That divide down the middle is something that we have seen published across the underground as well by a variety of actors, people siding with different countries in that space. Initial access brokers, that's becoming a very lucrative job role within the cyber underground, and something that's only going to increase, in my opinion, over the next 6 to 12 months. So threat actors that used to operate maybe selling credit cards or bins, anything like that, they will then start to now look at this access brokerage as a potential other way of making income and move into that more as we move forward. Big one to take away is session hijacking and social engineering. So being able to use marketplaces to obtain cookies and then conduct session hijacking is huge. And social engineering is going to be extremely significant, especially over the next 6 to 12 months. Threat actors are becoming more and more advanced with this, and it's something that we are going to see a lot more of. And obviously ransomware too. But finally, that's it from me. So thank you all very much. My details are on the screen. If you do want to drop me an email or you want to reach out, my email's on the screen. And that is it. Pending any questions, thank you all very much. I see there's one question there in the channel. Top 10 initial access brokers list. Yeah, if you're a customer of Intel 471, we can pass that on. If not, if you drop me an email, we can pull some bits together for you, which we'll be able to discuss if that answers your question. And one more, sorry, will the TLP white slides be made available? Yes, they will be made available at the end of the session. And if there's no other questions, then just thank you all very much for joining our talk. I really appreciate it. And like I've said, if there are any more questions, please do reach out and we'll be in touch with any answers that we have. Thanks, everyone.